China spent over $1 trillion building roads, ports, and railways across 140 countries, and it might be the most generous and most predatory project in human history at the same time. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. To understand how big this is, you need a comparison. After World War II, the United States launched the Marshall Plan. Adjusted for inflation, the Marshall Plan cost around $150 billion. It rebuilt Western Europe. China's Belt and Road has spent over $1 trillion. That's roughly 8 Marshall Plans. Not across a dozen European allies. Across 140-plus countries on every continent. Ports, railways, highways, power plants, fiber optic cables. The question everyone argues about. Is this the largest aid program in history, or the largest debt trap ever built? The answer is in the mechanics. A developing country needs a port, or a railway, or a power grid. They can't afford it. The World Bank won't fund it. Western governments aren't interested. China shows up with a check. But it's not a gift. It's a loan. And the loan has conditions. Condition 1. Chinese firms do the building. Condition 2. Chinese workers do the labor. Condition 3. Chinese materials get shipped in. So the host country takes on billions in debt, but the actual money flows right back to China. Look at what this means in practice. Laos, a landlocked country in Southeast Asia, GDP around $18 billion. One of the poorest nations in Asia. China offered to build them a high-speed railway, 414 kilometers, cutting straight through the mountains. The price tag, $5.9 billion. 1/3 of the country's entire GDP. Laos couldn't even pay its share. So it borrowed from Chinese banks to cover the gap. A single railway project consumed 1/3 of a nation's economic output, and Laos will be paying it off for decades. That's the mechanism. Now, what happens when a country actually defaults? Sri Lanka, 2017. The government had borrowed heavily from China to build Hambantota Port, a massive deep-water facility on the southern coast. The port was barely generating revenue. Ships weren't coming. The debt payments were. Sri Lanka couldn't pay, so China offered a deal. Lease us the port. 99 years. In 2017, Sri Lanka handed over Hambantota Port to a Chinese state-owned company, a 99-year lease. In 1898, Britain forced China to hand over Hong Kong on a 99-year lease. China called that lease one of the most humiliating events in its national history. A century of colonial exploitation. 99 years then, 99 years now. Different empire, same playbook. And this isn't an isolated case. Pakistan, Gwadar Port, another flagship BRI project. Billions invested. A brand new deep-water port. And it sits largely empty. Meanwhile, local Balochi fishermen were displaced from the coastline they'd worked for generations, locked out of their own coastline by Chinese-operated security. The debt numbers across all BRI countries are staggering. Over 60% of countries receiving BRI loans are now in debt distress or at high risk of it. And China is now the world's largest official creditor, bigger than the World Bank, bigger than the IMF, bigger than all G7 governments combined. By now, the story seems obvious. China built a debt trap. Except it's not that clean. The Belt and Road isn't working for China either. Since 2020, an estimated 42 countries have quietly renegotiated, paused, or canceled BRI projects. Malaysia, Myanmar, Kazakhstan, one by one walking away. China itself has written off at least $3.7 billion in bad BRI debt. Even Beijing admits some of these projects were financially unsound. The West noticed. In 2022, the US and G7 launched their answer, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. $600 billion pledged. But by 2024, only a fraction had actually been deployed. China had a decade head start and $1 trillion lead. So what is actually going on? Is BRI a mastermind strategy? Or a mess? Maybe neither. Maybe it started as a genuine infrastructure push. Fill the gap the West left open. Developing nations needed roads, power, connectivity. China offered. Nobody else was. But then the debt piled up. The contracts got exploitative. The strategic value started outweighing the humanitarian one. Today the Belt and Road is too big to call a simple debt trap, and too exploitative to call simple aid. It may be the most consequential infrastructure project in human history, and no one, possibly not even China, knows if it will pay off. Aid or trap? You tell me. If you like stories like these, please like and subscribe.